In 1940, I was living on a farm. My father died in 1937. We had pretty extensive farming relationships. I had an older brother who was 4 years older than I was, and he registered for the draft in 1940. His number was 58, and that was the first number called. And they were called for 6-month periods. The draft board said, well, told my mother, you have another son that's there that's able-bodied. That was me. I was 18 years old. They were not going to exempt my oldest brother, but I didn't like the farm, and I was not very anxious to get into that kind of a situation. So, but my oldest brother got a 6-month deferment until July 1941. And when that happened, the draft board said that they couldn't exempt him anymore because I was there. My mother cooked up a deal for me to take his place in the draft. So I went into the service in 1941. I was 18 years old, and I was drafted in Omaha, Nebraska. We lived on a farm 75 miles from Omaha. When I went to Omaha, I had a little bit of a sore throat. And so when I took the physical, the doctor said, well, I don't think we ought to send you on with the rest of the group because you ought to stay here a day or two and see what happens. And I had a little strep throat. And so they kept me for a couple of days, and the other 30 people that were in the draft group with me, they sent to Honolulu, Hawaii. They were at the barracks there for basic training. And since I had a sore throat, a couple of days I recovered, and they sent me to Fort Riley, Kansas for basic training. And most of the people that were with me had gone to Hawaii and were at Pearl Harbor when the war was started. So it was very lucky that I had a sore throat and missed that trip. Went with the 1st Cavalry Division later, which was probably the most prominent organization in the war during the European theater. It became a tank organization, although it was a horse organization when I first went in, and went to Officers Candidate School at Fort Bliss, or Camp Lee, Virginia, in 1942. I spent most of my time with a quartermaster truck company with black troops. Mainly at that time the Army was segregated, and we had 5 white officers and 110 black enlisted men, and that existed I think entirely during the period I was in the service. They did integrate the Army after that, so that kind of desegregation or segregation doesn't exist anymore. We were at Fort Riley, Kansas when we'd gotten orders to go to the Pacific at that time, and I was the motor officer. It meant I had responsibility for the motor pool and the maintenance and direction of the trucks and scheduling and all that sort of thing. Somebody had to go to San Francisco as the advance agent for the company. So I got orders one day that I was to leave Fort Riley and catch a train to San Francisco. It was to go there at 4 o'clock in the morning, and by the train intersection, sit there with the Jeep with the lights on, and the train would stop and pick me up. And the through train to San Francisco did come through at 4 o'clock in the morning. It stopped at the intersection. The conductor got out and he said, "Are you Lieutenant Ogren?" And I said I was. And he said, "Get on, let's go." And so they had a berth for me, and I went to sleep. Next morning I went down to breakfast, and I heard these people talk. What in the world was that? Why'd we stop way out here in the country in the middle of the night for? Nobody knew what that was, but it was kind of always amusing to me that I was responsible for that, because I was 21 years old at that time. You know, we spent some time in Manila as a supply organization for Base X, and then were chosen for the blacklist, as it was called at that time, which was designed for the invasion of Japan. That started up in about July 1945, June or July, Um, and we were getting geared up for that point, getting equipment fixed up and making sure we had a full complement of troops and that sort of thing. And we're scheduled for invasion in the summer of '45. And the bomb was dropped, the first atomic bomb was dropped in August of 1945 on Hiroshima. We left for Japan in September, and we went on an LST, a landing ship tank, up through the China Sea. And we landed, we were destined to go into Kuri. Kuri is on the south end of Honshu Island, which is the main island of Japan. And Kuri was the naval base, the Annapolis of Japan. And we set up, we were probably the only organization in there at that time. We set up a campsite and took over a bombed out area and pitched tents and whatnot. And during that period, 3 other officers and myself decided we would take a run around the end of the bay and go over to Hiroshima and see what it looked like. And we did that one Sunday afternoon, out for a Sunday drive. And we saw Hiroshima. There wasn't anything there. Nothing had really been set up organizationally by the Army as yet. So we drove into the city and drove around. The streets were open so you could get through. Trucks and buses and the debris had been pushed off to the side of the road. We were right in the center of the city, and I have pictures to show you that the center of Hiroshima was just as flat as the parking lot out here could be almost. And the Japanese were very stoic. They looked at us with curiosity, made no problems for us. I don't remember whether we were armed or not. We probably were at that time. We probably were not foolish enough to go into a strange city in Japan without being armed. We weren't, of course, aware of what the effects of radiation were at that time. Nobody had a very good idea what was going to happen. Nothing happened to me, at least. I'm not sure what happened to the other people. We probably were one of the early groups of people that were into Japan, into Hiroshima at least. The second bomb was dropped in Nagasaki, which is about 50 miles away, as I recall, a little further north up the coast. And of course, that was the item that triggered the surrender of Japan, and I left home from there not long after that. Well, the one thing that the service did, you grew up very quickly. And I had major responsibilities when I was 19, 20 years old. Probably not so much that I deserved some of it, but and probably due an awful lot to the fact that there wasn't anybody else around. At that time, the country was in dire shapes, trying to build up a force, and anybody with any kind of an experience, and if you showed any kind of leadership ability, you had leadership opportunities heaped on you. So overall, I think the service was good for me.